Hi all. Some people may have a late attitude for chess, so even if they didn't start at say the age of 5 and became an IM at like 15, they can still potentially later on rise up dramatically in rating. And one such player I believe is David Haydon, who had a fantastic London Classic at the end of last year, and he came first equal in the Southend Open just recently. And in the last round he played an FM. By the way, in the London Classic he beat actually GM Neil MacDonald quite convincingly. And before that, earlier in the year, he'd beaten GM Haydon. So this is a guy who's the same ECF rating as me, 199, but he's going up definitely to about 215. I would estimate that's his low estimate, 215. He might be even higher. So this is a player with a massive rating jump, which is going to happen on the next rating list. His FIDE is currently 2247, so he's going to go up on FIDE quite a lot though, and maybe he's going to be an FM, even before the end of the year. It just depends if he can play in some FIDE tournaments. I think he's got the full capability to do that, at the very least. I saw David play at Southend a few years back, where unfortunately in the last round at that point he lost to Bob Eames. It was a bit unlucky to lose, but maybe he played a bit too quickly, but he learnt his lesson from that. So this was another last round critical game against Nicolas Croad, 2290. So a FIDE master though, he's been over 2300. So Nicolas played d4. By the way, David is also on the King's Crusher Cafe quite often if you want to challenge him at Blitz at Chess Cube. If you come to the cafe, he's mighty_king. So that's pretty cool as well. And I've been playing him a lot actually on Chess Cube recently. My personal match score against him, our first encounter, I was very sleepy during the game and managed to draw, and in the Sicilian Sveshnikov when I was still playing that. And then the next game was a King's Indian, again black, and I managed to lose quite convincingly. So he's improving leaps and bounds. In this game he plays actually, his first move is actually c6. So kind of inviting the Caro-Kann. So, I mean, you can also play e6 to invite a French defense. So this is kind of saying, I can play the Caro-Kann as well if you want to play e4. But the opponent played c4, so we have the Slav territory. And as a general rule, I don't like video annotating any Slav Defense games at all, but unless they're exceptionally interesting or there's a specific reason, so that's why we're seeing a Slav Defense game. It's an ultra solid defense. It doesn't block in the Queen's bishop. It's raging in popularity at the moment, but I still think it's quite dull. That's my personal kind of feeling about it, compared to like the King's Indian or the Indian systems, or the Dutch defense, or whatever. So anyway, knight f3, knight f6, and now this very conservative move, which kind of reflects maybe a Capablanca type approach, not very theoretical, keeping an eye on the c4 pawn, but blocking in the bishop, which might be potentially a passive concept. So David actually, he leaves his bishop at home as well. He locks it behind the pawn chain immediately, because maybe if bishop f5 there'll be like cd and potentially knight c3 and queen b3, putting pressure on b7 as well as d5. So this is a more kind of cautious continuation, voluntarily leaving the bishop behind the pawn on e6. And now we see b3. So the bishop's revealed its intention. It's going to lock down the e5 square. Okay, or it's more unlikely, I would say, to exchange off bishop is another thing. Obviously not here, because like queen a5 would be like losing the knight on a3. So David now, he kind of liberates his position though with this next move, c5. So it's almost saying against this setup from white that the Tarrasch kind of strategy, get a lot of tension in the centre, is more justified. Now, why would that be the case? In fact, it's almost symmetrical here, except black hasn't committed with b6. Then it would be symmetrical. So this extra b3 means this bishop, okay, is potentially going to go to b7, b2, but there's going to be no counter bishop on b7. But if white's going to play cd, he'll be locking in his bishop and liberating this one on this diagonal, so that in fact there'll be no need for b6. Okay, so let's see how the game evolves now. Bishop d3, knight c6, and now bishop b2. So really, does black want to lock in this bishop behind the d4 pawn? I guess he does. And David's next move really asks that question, actually, a little bit. He plays c takes d4, saying to white, are you going to actually leave your bishop locked in behind the pawn on d4? But I don't think knight takes d4. It looks as though it's conceding the e5 square and other squares. That's not really that pliable here. So e takes d4, but still there's the promise of the e5 outpost later, and maybe, you know, casting a rook e1. So bishop e7. And now after castles, in fact, David is content to go kind of symmetrical with his bishop being potentially fianchettoed, or maybe just coming to a6 to pressurize c4. So b6, okay, knight bd2, bishop b7. So solid, not quite symmetrical. This knight is on d2, but this knight's on c6. So how can David make progress here? He castles, rook ad1. It looks as though white's got a pleasant position. Maybe the bishop can now come back. Then maybe knight e5, f4, f5. Looks tempting. So queen c7, and in fact knight e5 does arise now, because, you know, the bishop supporting that d4 pawn. It's kind of justified to try and undermine the structure like this. It looks justified, but it depends how much counterplay black's potentially getting. He has slightly loosened control of d4, so can actually black try and get counterplay against d4? Well, rook ad8 signals that he might be playing now, takes, and then, you know, d4 is under fire. So knight d f3, not venturing for f4, too weakening at the moment. And now David simply exchanges the knight on e5 and simply plays bishop d6. So what is going on here? White's potentially got these hanging pawns if black ever sides dc, and that would also liberate the bishop on the diagonal. But can this knight be used as a kind of resource to justify a kind of direct attack on black's king? Well, bishop b1, which means actually that there's a rook lift now facilitated potentially, putting these potential squares under fire. Rook fe8, a rook behind the pawn, mysterious rook move, but it means cd, ed, there'll be immediately pressure on e5. So it can be argued that this also facilitates bishop f8 and g6 and bishop g7. So a dual purpose defensive move, bit of prophylaxis against cd, and also to be able to play bishop f8. And now actually we see the start of a potentially very dangerous attack. So rook d3, the rook lift actually occurs, but black solves his strategic problem now completely. This bishop is now good after d takes c4 in that diagonal. White's interested now in going straight for the attack, rook h3, not bothering to recapture at the moment. And it's looking kind of dangerous. These guys are ganging up on h7. And in fact, bishop h7, knight h7, queen h5 is looking dangerous, with kind of mating opportunities. So g6 designed against that. And now white recaptures. So is this rook kind of misplaced? It's a bit committed away from the centre, whilst look at black's rooks, they're totally in the centre. So black has the greater kind of independence. I think I've mentioned this before, the importance of the centre is your pieces are more, you know, fluid, independent of switching to the left or right or being used for a variety of purposes as needed. But once they're committed like this on the edge of the board, you know, that rook is going to have to take time now to get back. Black also has fine bishops here, complementary bishops, just raking down these diagonals. So this next move, bishop f8, though, is saying, you know, the bishop actually might be better on g7, because then maybe knight d7, and again pressure on d4 and e5. So f3, this really shuts down the rook actually. It looks like you know, it looks a bit of an ugly move. Maybe the idea is to support, you know, playing bishop e4, but it looks as though that rook not only is decentralized, it's going to be difficult to get back into the game now. So bishop g7, and in fact, so these bishops, although they're not virtually side by side now, they're still complementary across the board like this. So we have complementary bishops with a crossfire now. And I saw actually myself a video annotation of a game recently comparing two bishops together with two bishops on crossfire, and someone was saying as if it's more advantageous to have them together. I don't know. This looks nice as well to have this crossfire. The bishops are complementary, attacking, you know, different colours of square. And d4 and e5 are certainly going to be under greater pressure, especially with knight d7. Wouldn't that just leave the rook looking extremely silly on h3? But f3 is now more justified, at least tactically, with this next move. But does this attack realistically have much chance for success? Queen f2, not only putting a bit more protection on d4, but also going to switch to h4 for a crude continuation of this attack, which we've seen recently in the World Championship Candidates match, this Mamadreov game as white. Against the US champion, sorry, not the US champion, against the Israeli #1, Boris Gelfand, who was very calm and collected and managed to scoop up loads of pawns. But here, the situation is different. Is that rook looking really silly? This bishop in particular is not contributing much to the attack. It's behind that d4 pawn. And these hanging pawns, if they can be fixed, they're going to be made into a more exploitable weakness. So knight d7. It's really, I think the quality of the rooks is really superb here, potentially, for black aesthetically. This rook doesn't look aesthetic, but there's functionality here for white's pieces, potentially, to get a vicious attack against David's king. So queen h4, we have h6, and now, in fact, this bishop shows it's not so fixed as just protecting d4, bishop c1. So is David worried here? What can you do about this attack? It looks actually kind of dangerous now, and he plays the move g5. Not too concerned about anything like bishop g5 and queen g5, because really I think he's timing like knight e5 and queen c5 and queen e5 as he's going to be able to beat off this attack. With the defensive bishop on g7, these attacks don't usually work too well. So queen g3, and now knight takes e5, check. And now David cheekily nabs the c4 pawn, but he's got time. He's attacking the rook. This rook's still stranded. In fact, this queen is also looking fairly decentralized, and e5 is looking vulnerable, and also this first rank is looking a little bit vulnerable. So at the moment, white seems to have a highly committed position with the pieces, so simply try and go for the black king. So can the black king safety be taken out of the equation? And in the next few moves, David is proving it can actually be taken out of the equation to simply leave, you know, better positioned pieces striking well across the centre. So the move now queen e2. So that implies that rook d1 is going to be useful, trying to emphasise the weakness of this first rank, and these bishops would be embarrassingly kind of loose. But here white gets kind of violence now. He lashes out with rook takes h6. David accepts the rook. Bishop takes g5. So can the queen combined with these two bishops do over the black king? Well, this is where David's escape plan comes into action. He takes the bishop. Check, king f8. And it's difficult to even force a perpetual check now. The king has got a running escape plan, like in the World Championship game, where Gelfand was able to escape with his king. The same is happening here. The king escapes via e7. Now d7, it's coming to the queen side. Black is simply a rook up. And not only that, he's preparing now dangerous possibilities of just using the h-file for his own attack. Especially that rook looking rather silly on g1 for like a self-mate, something coming up soon. So the queen is kicked to d2. It's no big deal. It's still dangerous. It's guarding that d1. White's attack's blown, I think, already. There's no real attack here going on. I think this is already won now. So h3, rook h8, finally hijacking the h file. The king's very safe on c7 at the moment. How can it be exploited? White's run out of bits. It's an embarrassment of the cost of the attack was really decentralizing and overcommitting White's pieces, and then just losing material after that. So rook dg8, and here is 0-1. I believe actually the opponent might have resigned. It does look totally resignable here. There's a big threat of queen g2 mate, and if rook g1, I'm sure there's a neat tactical shot here. I suppose bishop f3, there's queen a7. So let's just let's just embarrassingly check this position. I don't want to say something really silly. I'll just rook takes h3, and then bishop takes f3 mating. Okay, that's pretty obvious actually. Rook h3. Coming to think about it. So White resigned here. It looks pretty defenseless. And black's just the rook up. So let's check this game out again. So this is another warning, really. We're receiving these warnings from recent games, even in Grandmaster games, that the price of going for the attack, is often subtle, but then leading to very concrete concession-like material. But the first subtle concession is overcommitment of pieces, which leading to loss of control in the position. Or leading to like the queen side being dismantled. But here, black's pieces were always firmly kind of pegged in the centre. If you look at black's pieces, care was taken that they always had contact to the centre. And even though it looked a little bit like provocation, that White's aiming to get first that entrenched knight on e5, the outpost knight, as a kind of justification for the attack, but with some solid manoeuvring here, it was shown that White needs to be very careful with this kind of rook lift. I think this is much more effective on the quicker time controls, where the defensive resources, they're harder to find. But if you can find the defensive resources, it can be shown, like this game, that White's is having trouble, severe difficulties getting back into the game if the attack can be parried. And here it's definitely being parried, in the centre is just crumbling. This knight d7, this beautiful bishop manoeuvre to get the bishop, attacking these key squares, I think that's quite instructive. And that happened to me actually the last London Classic in the first round, or the second round, against this up and coming FM who got his final IM norm, but he counter-attacked my centre when I went for the attack. It's like a common recipe antidote to someone going for the attack. Just try and intensify like the pressure on the centre, and there'll be material concessions, and if their attack doesn't work out like here, that's going to be a seemingly easy looking counter attack and win. The check forcing the king to h1 is also kind of nice before taking the pawn, and the queen invasion, it's just White's just a sitting duck now. This is looking, it smacks of a bit of desperation, especially if the king can escape like this without even the perpetual check being available to White. The king's free to escape to the queen side, and now the full point is achieved just by going on to the attack. Well, a rook up, many ways to win. I hope you enjoyed that. There's another David Haydon game. I'll try and find and reply to that video so you can see the other video annotation I've done. And we may look at some of his London Classic games over the next few weeks, like where he beat GM Neil MacDonald. So comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.